Michael Harper opened his mail one day to find a bogus $1,500 fine from his HOA for a fence he never built. When he tried to fight it, the HOA dismissed him, threatened legal action, and even warned they could put a lien on his house. But when Michael uncovered a shocking mistake in their so-called evidence, he refused to back down and brought in a lawyer who turned the tables on them. And trust me, the way this HOA was forced to eat their own words is something you won't want to miss. Michael Harper wasn't expecting anything unusual when he checked his mailbox that afternoon. Bills, advertisements, maybe a package slip, just the usual. He flipped through the stack absent-mindedly until a thicker envelope with an official-looking seal caught his eye. It had the HOA's letterhead printed in bold at the top. He sighed, already bracing himself. HOA letters were never good news. Michael wasn't someone who actively rebelled against the association's rules, but he'd heard enough horror stories from his neighbors to know that dealing with them was a nightmare. Ridiculous fines for minor infractions, arbitrary rule enforcement, and board members drunk on power. It was all part of the HOA experience. Still, he had never been fined before, so whatever this was, he figured it had to be minor. Maybe a warning about his garbage cans being left out too long or a notice about neighborhood maintenance. Then he opened the letter, and his stomach dropped. Right there, printed in bold red ink, was the amount, $1,500 fine. Michael's breath hitched as he read the details. Violation, unauthorized fence installation. Homeowner has installed a fence without proper HOA approval and necessary permits. A fine of $1,500 has been assessed. Please remit payment within 30 days to avoid additional penalties. Michael froze, rereading the letter again. A fence? His mind scrambled for any possible explanation, but there was none, because he didn't have a damn fence. Not a single wooden post, not a single picket, not even a makeshift barrier of any kind. His yard was exactly the same as it had been for years. At first, he actually laughed out loud. Surely, this was a mistake. Some clerical error, some lazy inspector misfiled paperwork, or maybe a new neighbor had installed a fence and their address got mixed up with his. That had to be it. This would be a simple phone call, a quick, "Hey, you got the wrong guy," and they'd correct it. No problem. Still shaking his head in disbelief, Michael pulled out his phone and dialed the HOA office. After a few rings, an emotionless, disinterested voice answered. Homeowners Association office. How can I assist you?" Michael exhaled sharply, forcing himself to stay calm. "Yeah, hi. My name is Michael Harper. I live at 814 Maplewood Drive, and I just got a fine for unauthorized fence installation. But there's a problem. I don't have a fence." There was a brief pause. Then, in a tone that sounded entirely unconcerned, the woman replied, "Sir, all violations are based on official HOA inspections. If you received a notice, that means your property was reviewed and the fine is valid." Michael's grip on his phone tightened. Right, I get that. But I'm telling you, I don't have a fence, so this is obviously a mistake." The woman didn't even hesitate. "If you believe this is an error, you are welcome to file an appeal." Michael rubbed his forehead, trying to stay patient. Okay, what's the process for that?" "The appeal process requires a formal application and a non-refundable $250 fee." Michael froze. "I have to pay $250 just to contest a fine that shouldn't even exist?" "That is our policy, sir. But failure to remit payment within 30 days will result in additional penalties." Michael's mouth went dry. It was like talking to a machine. There was no reasoning, no logic, no common sense, just rigid, robotic rule enforcement designed to bleed homeowners dry. And suddenly, he saw the bigger picture. This wasn't just a simple mistake. This was a scam. How many other homeowners had gotten similar fines? How many just paid up because they didn't want to deal with the HOA's endless bureaucracy? Michael could feel his pulse hammering. It wasn't even about the money at this point. It was about the principle. They thought he would just roll over and accept it, that he'd pay the fine like a good little homeowner and let them get away with it. Well, not this time. Michael wasn't going down without a fight. Michael had tried to let it go for a few days. He told himself that maybe, just maybe, the HOA would realize their mistake and send a correction. He even checked his mailbox each morning with a tiny sliver of hope, half expecting to see another letter apologizing for the clerical error. But when the next envelope finally arrived, it was worse than before. The first thing he noticed was the red stamp across the top of the page. Final notice, immediate action required. His stomach tightened as he tore it open. This wasn't just a reminder of the fine. This time the language was more aggressive, threatening. Failure to remit payment within the allotted 30-day period will result in legal action. The Homeowners Association reserves the right to initiate proceedings to secure a lien against the property located at 814 Maplewood Drive. Additional late fees may apply. Michael's hands clenched into fists as he read it over again. A lien? They were actually threatening to put a legal hold on his home over a fine for a fence he didn't even have? A wave of cold anger settled in his chest. He'd heard stories of HOA abuse before, but this was next-level extortion. Michael wasn't a lawyer, but even he knew that a lien on his house could screw up everything. His credit, his ability to refinance, even his ability to sell in the future. This wasn't just a threat. It was a financial weapon designed to force homeowners into submission. His initial frustration was now boiling over into full-fledged anxiety. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. The neighborhood's dark secret determined to get some answers. Michael decided to talk to his neighbors. If this was happening to him, who else had been targeted? The first person he spoke to was Lisa, who lived 2 houses down. She was a quiet woman in her 50s, always polite, but rarely one to get involved in neighborhood drama. When Michael explained what was happening, her face immediately hardened. "Oh, they're pulling that crap again." Michael's pulse jumped. "Again?" Lisa nodded grimly. "You're not the first, Michael. They've done this to at least 5 other people I know of. Sometimes it's a fence, sometimes it's illegal modifications, sometimes it's parking violations for cars that were never there." Michael felt a chill creep down his spine. What happens if people fight back?" Lisa let out a bitter laugh. "Most don't. They get scared, they pay up and move on. But Jason, next street over, he tried to fight. HOA kept hitting him with fines one after another. Then they filed for foreclosure when he couldn't keep up. He lost his damn house, Michael." Michael's stomach dropped. Foreclosure. They were ruining people's lives over nonsense violations. He needed to talk to Jason. A warning from Jason lived just a street away, and when Michael knocked on his door, he half expected the man to be furious at the mention of the HOA. Instead, Jason just looked tired, like someone who had fought a battle and lost. Michael told him about the bogus fence fine, the threats, and the legal notice. When he finished, Jason just shook his head. "They're testing you, man, seeing if you'll cave." Michael swallowed hard. I don't get it. Why? Why do they do this?" Jason sighed, running a hand through his short, graying hair. Money and control. HOA isn't about keeping the community nice. That's just the excuse. It's about power. If they find enough people, they get extra cash. If they push hard enough, people either pay or leave. Then they bring in buyers who fit their vision. You know, the kind who won't question anything." Michael's jaw tightened. "But this is illegal." Jason let out a dry chuckle. "Yeah? And what are you going to do, sue them? They have lawyers on retainer. You think they care if some guy like you complains? They've been doing this for years. You either fight and risk losing everything, or you pay and keep your head down." Michael felt the weight of the situation settle onto his shoulders. The HOA wasn't just a group of overzealous rule enforcers. They were predators. They'd weaponized bureaucracy, using it to squeeze homeowners for every penny, using fear and legal loopholes to make sure no one could stop them. Michael could feel it creeping in, that pressure, that weight, that feeling of being trapped. And for a moment, he understood why so many people just gave up. But then another feeling pushed its way forward. Rage. If they thought he was just going to roll over, they were dead wrong. Michael had spent days simmering in frustration, feeling the walls closing in. Every time he thought about the $1,500 fine and the threats of legal action, it made his blood boil. The sheer audacity of the HOA demanding payment for a fence that didn't even exist was beyond absurd. He had tried reasoning with them. That failed. He had tried asking for clarification. That failed too. It was clear that they weren't interested in fairness. They weren't interested in resolving mistakes. They were interested in money and control. But Michael wasn't going to bend. If they wanted a fight, then he was going to give them one. Step 1. Forcing HOA to show their evidence. Michael realized that if the HOA was so confident in their fine, they must have some kind of documentation to back it up. He had never received a formal notice of inspection, never seen a violation report, and never been informed of any actual proof that his property was in violation, so he decided to demand it. He marched straight into the HOA office, a place he had hoped never to set foot in. The receptionist, the same emotionless woman he had spoken to over the phone, barely looked up when he approached the desk. "I need to see the inspection report that led to my violation notice." She gave him the same tired, bureaucratic sigh he had already heard too many times. "Sir, all violations are properly documented by our inspection team. The fine remains valid." Michael didn't budge. "Then show me the documentation." The woman hesitated. "Sir, you'll need to submit a formal request." "I'm formally requesting it now." She pursed her lips, clearly annoyed that he wasn't just backing down like every other homeowner who had been steamrolled before him. After a long pause, she finally muttered, "One moment." Michael watched as she disappeared into the back office. A full 10 minutes passed, then 15. Finally, she returned, holding a manila folder. "Here's your report." Michael grabbed it and immediately flipped it open. Inside was a printed violation notice and a single attached photograph. The moment he saw it, his breath caught in his throat. Step 2. The HOA's big mistake. It took less than a second for Michael to realize what was wrong with the photo. It wasn't his house. His eyes flicked to the address number clearly visible in the image, and it wasn't his. His heart pounded as he took in the details. The house in the picture was directly across the street from his own. They had found the wrong damn house. Michael let out a sharp, bitter laugh, causing the receptionist to look up from her computer. Something wrong, sir?" she asked flatly. Michael smirked. "Yeah, turns out you guys fined me for my neighbor's fence." The woman's expression barely changed, but he noticed the way she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She knew. They all knew. HOA had either made an incredibly sloppy mistake or, even worse, had knowingly sent the fine to the wrong person, assuming he would just pay it to avoid the hassle. Michael snapped a quick photo of the report with his phone. Then, without another word, he turned on his heel and walked out. Step 3. Bringing in the big guns. Michael had all the proof he needed, but he knew that simply showing HOA their mistake wouldn't be enough. They had already proven that they were willing to lie, threaten, and manipulate to get their way. He needed legal muscle. So the next morning, he made a very important call to a lawyer. His friend had recommended Ethan Carter, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who had dealt with HOA disputes before. When Michael explained the situation over the phone, Ethan didn't even hesitate. "Hey, this is classic HOA extortion. Send me everything you've got, and I'll take care of the rest." Within hours, Ethan had drafted an official legal demand letter addressed to the HOA board. It was brutal. "To the Homeowners Association Board, I represent Mr. Michael Harper, a homeowner who has been wrongfully fined under your association's guidelines. Upon review of the provided violation report, it is evident that the cited infraction pertains to a property that does not belong to my client. Despite multiple attempts by Mr. Harper to rectify this issue, your office has continued to demand payment, issued legal threats, and attempted to coerce my client into compliance through financial intimidation. This is not only a gross administrative failure, but may constitute fraudulent activity and predatory enforcement practices. Should this matter not be immediately resolved by an official written retraction of the violation and fine a formal apology issued to Mr. Harper, a compensation amount for the undue stress and legal fees incurred, we will have no choice but to escalate the matter further, including but not limited to formal complaints to state regulatory bodies, a public disclosure of HOA's conduct, and legal proceedings against the board for damages. You have 72 hours to respond accordingly." Michael smiled to himself as he read the final draft. This was no longer just about getting rid of the fine. This was about holding HOA accountable. They had picked the wrong homeowner to mess with. Michael didn't have to wait long. Less than 48 hours after his lawyer sent the demand letter, HOA responded with a half-hearted email. After reviewing your case, we have determined that an administrative oversight led to an incorrect violation notice. We have decided to rescind the fine and close the matter. We regret any inconvenience this may have caused. Michael scoffed. That's it? No apology. No acknowledgement of the stress and threats they had put him through. Just a quiet attempt to sweep it under the rug. Well, that wasn't happening. HOA tries to brush it off. Michael pushes back. Michael called his lawyer. They dropped the fine, but I'm not letting them walk away that easily. Ethan agreed. Together, they sent a new demand. A formal written apology, $5,000 in compensation for legal fees and emotional distress. A review of HOA's enforcement policies to prevent future abuse. HOA tried to push back, calling Michael personally. We don't believe compensation is necessary, said Paul Kingston, a board member. Michael didn't flinch. You nearly put a lien on my house over nothing. I have a lawyer and local news contacts. Your call. Long silence, then a reluctant sigh. No, we'll be in touch. 2 days later, HOA caved. Victory and a ripple effect. Michael received a formal apology letter, $5,000 settlement, a commitment to review HOA's policies. But that wasn't all. Word spread through the neighborhood, and suddenly other homeowners started fighting back too. Multiple fines were overturned. At least 3 bogus citations were exposed. HOA had to refund over $20,000 in wrongful charges. The enforcement team responsible, fired. Michael never received another fraudulent fine again. HOA learned a lesson. Not everyone would just roll over and pay.